South Africa has seen several apartheid-era inquests reopened in recent years, from Ahmed Timol to Neil Aggett. And now, nearly 5 decades after his death in police custody, the case of Steve Biko is back before the courts. It's a moment that reopens old wounds, raises questions of delayed justice, and also just forces us to ask what this means for South Africa's democracy and, perhaps racial tensions as well. So Veli Mbele, kaSompisi, is a Black consciousness proponent, is a writer, co-founder of Mutapa Afrocentric Dialogues, is going to be joining us this morning bright and early to weigh in. Very good morning. Thanks for your time on the SABC at this hour.
Good morning, my sister Lizel. Thank you for the opportunity.
Veli, from your vantage point, talk to us about why you think it's taken so long for the inquest into Steve Biko's death to actually be reopened, and really what it says about the broader pace of justice in South Africa for post-apartheid crimes.
Yes, that's perhaps an important entry point for the discussion, and perhaps to also just remind our viewers that this would actually be the third time, right, in historical sequence that we would be dealing with the matter of Steve Biko in the form of an inquest. Remember, there was an inquest in the same year that Biko was killed in 1977. Obviously, that was under the apartheid government, which then found that there was nobody from the apartheid state side who was held criminally liable for his murder in detention, which was not a surprising outcome, right? And they attributed his death to, amongst others, brain injury, injury to the brain rather, and a number of other factors that they cited. But also remember, in 1996, the Biko family, the Mklenga family, the Ribeiro family, and the Zanyan People's Organization made an application to the Constitutional Court, right, to also exact justice for the murder of Biko. So that was the second time. So the third time is the conversation we are having now, the recent decision of the NPA. So that history is particularly important. Now, one of the reasons why I suspect there's been such a delay after 1994 has to do with the fact that there is an outstanding matter of over 300 cases that were recommended for prosecution by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And as you would recall, the Biko family and about 20 other families at the beginning of this year, this thing lodged a case, with the court for these cases that have not been prosecuted. So it comes in the context recently of the over 300 cases that were not pursued for criminal prosecution by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that is a matter that is now before court to establish as to why those cases were not pursued. And it would be interesting to see what that what that case reveals, so as to what the reasons were, because this is after 1994 and there was an expectation that a government in the democratic era would pursue that. So that is one of the factors that would have led, in my view, to the delay.
Well, Veli, you make a valid point. It's ultimately also bringing to the role of the TRC and the efficacy and the work that's also been done and the impact as well. But I wonder, even if we're just looking at justice and what that really means, particularly after so many years, is it at this point just largely symbolic? And I'm asking this because we're obviously seeing the reopening of Steve Biko's inquest yet again. You had Ahmed Timol, you had Neil Aggett as well. And I wonder how these inquests would compare and what lessons should also be learnt about accountability ultimately at large, coupled with the role of the TRC.
Yes, it is a fundamental question, my sister Lizel, because it's not just so much about the legalese, right, and the court processes, because sometimes this is one of the weaknesses of conversations on these matters in the South African context, that we forget the historical and political context that informs what happens in the courts. So, for instance, we must locate the issue of Steve Biko's case, the Craddock 4, the cases of Noctulas Melane, the Kosas 4, the Ribeiro, the Mklenga, all of those cases, we must locate them in the context of what is referred to as the crimes of colonialism, right? So they are not just simply issues of legality and courts and court rulings. They are the crimes of colonialism. And I'm raising this to help us understand that globally, the crimes of colonialism generally go unpunished, and that the victims of colonialism rarely get justice. And this is an important thing to note, even as we interrogate the cases I have mentioned. Secondly, if you just use the South African example, for instance, if there is a group of young boys aged between, say, 15 and 14 who were killed cold-bloodedly in 1993 October in a raid by the apartheid-era defense force that was sanctioned by the former apartheid president F.W. de Klerk, who openly admitted, right, to that crime. Those boys were killed in their sleep. Now, he then went on to enjoy state benefits, and he died or retired peacefully, whatever the case may be. So there's been no justice for such cases, but you have found that the perpetrators of apartheid crimes, always go off scot-free. And that is the bigger question. The other issue is you can't want to pursue these cases and not deal with the bigger problem, which is the problem of things like land dispossession and the continued economic powerlessness of Black people. Because this is the history out of which, the struggle for liberation arises, that we should not start the story in the courts. We must also deal with those bigger issues. And justice would then mean dealing with those bigger issues as well. Issues of economic justice, issues of land dispossession, because these cases must also implicate those other bigger colonial problems.
Yep, absolutely. And those are the ripple effects because of those socio-economic political constructs that obviously continue to play itself out. And thank you for speaking to the need for accountability of colonial crimes, but even just networks of complicity. Because at this point, given where we are as a country, over 31 years into our own democracy, we still have unresolved racial, social, economic tensions in our own country today. And so with the opening of these inquests, I wonder if you could weigh in on what impact it's ultimately going to have with this reconciliation project, with truth-telling as well, with accountability, perhaps also just so that families can have peace.
No, certainly, so the issues of reconciliation come up, the issues of justice. And it is important, again, that we locate them properly in terms of history. So reconciliation is meaningless if there's no justice. It becomes a farce. It actually becomes an insult to the victims of colonial and apartheid crimes, right? So the critical issue is that if you have justice, you don't then have to worry about reconciliation, because if you have justice, justice gives you actually a better chance at reconciliation, because what you do if you pursue justice is that you don't just pursue truth, but you also pursue fairness, right, for the victims, and you openly acknowledge and also make a material effort to deal with the pain and the suffering of the victims of these crimes. But if you have a type of reconciliation, right, that continuously expects the victims to forgive, right? And while they continue to suffer with no material support or benefit to them, you are continue to have what people call racial tension, which is a misnomer, right? Because the problem also is not racial tension. The problem is the fact that we have not resolved the problems of colonialism in our country, right? That is always the fundamental problem. And the issues that people often raise about racial tension are also false narratives that don't want to deal with what we call the root of the problem, which is the problem of colonial problems of dispossession and economic justice for the Black majority, we know, because those are the people who have been negatively affected. Yeah. And those are the conversations that this inquest is going to force to confront yet again. Right?
Well, Veli, I know that there are still many more questions and answers lingering as we await justice, but thank you for weighing at this time and for being part of this important chat. I know that there were, activities yesterday, and it continues as we edge closer to November when it will be reopened. The Biko inquest, it now joins a growing list of apartheid-era cases that will be revisited. South Africa, obviously, just confronting the unfinished work of truth and justice in its democracy at large. Thanks to Veli again for joining us.